Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
The Jews who have a decent understanding of the Bible actually expect to see the image of the Mashiach in other biblical characters. Yeah. That is their expectation.
That's right.
They expect to read the Bible and see the Messiah there.
Yeah.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
We've been focusing specifically on the life and person of Mashiach, the prophesied Messiah of the Jewish people, for some time. We've looked at the prophecies themselves and the mathematical probabilities of one single individual fulfilling them all. We've looked at the fact that there have been so many self-proclaimed messiahs throughout history that it might be a little hard to identify which is the right one. We've also spent some time learning about the Jewish understanding of two messiahs, both unique and different. They are known as Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah son of Joseph, and Mashiach ben David, Messiah son of David. Joseph is prophesied to be a suffering Messiah, and David is prophesied to be a warrior Messiah. We came to the conclusion in our last program that Jesus is in fact both these Messiahs, but not two, rather he's one Messiah who at different times will fulfill the calling and mission of each. He came 2,000 years ago as the suffering Messiah and will one day return as the warrior Messiah and establish his everlasting kingdom.
They're almost completely contrasted until you look a little closer, but they look like they're contrasting characters. And the description of the prophecies are obviously contrasting characters. But how do you sort of unify and bring them together? I mean, we came to that conclusion last time, but I really would like to look at the individual characters, like their personality traits, and see how each of them mirrors or complements what we know is prophesied about Mashiach. Because the personality and the mission of both Joseph and David, they're very different, and yet they're kind of not. You don't expect it till you look a little deep and you go, wow, the similarities are amazing. So I want to use again, and I've mentioned this before, and I highly recommend this resource. It is oneforisrael.org, and a lot of the material that I have been learning from is from Dr. Itan Bar, and he is a Messianic Jew, as I've said before. So this is a ministry of Jewish believers in Jesus, and their goal is they want to be able to educate and reach their own community, which I just think is like just so wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so wonderful. But at the same time, we Gentile believers get to learn from this as well. Okay, so have you ever read something in the Bible and you immediately think of another story or another event? You go, oh, that reminds me of such and such. Well, to the Jewish mind and understanding, God actually designed the Bible that way. There is a professor of biblical studies, his name is Dr. Yair Zakovich, who explains the phenomenon this way. This is what he said, quote, "The biblical narrator does his best to inspire the reader to pay attention to the mirroring associations between the stories, especially those who are set far apart in time from one another." So it's like these stories are like a mirroring reflection. You know, you read one, you go, oh, that's like that. And then you read that one. I mean, did you notice that when Dr. Chuck Missler would be teaching from a particular passage, he'd literally jump all over the Bible?
Yeah,
you
that's
think,
right.
My goodness, he's going down these rabbit warrens, but it's all connected.
Yep, just joining the dots.
Just joining the
That's
dots,
right.
yeah.
Well, another quote that I've seen from Rabbi Amnon Dov Bazak said, "Explicit parallelism between various events is an accepted practice of the Old Testament itself. Quite often, we find that various characters in the Old Testament refer to an earlier event in order to ascribe strength and validity to their message." Yeah.
Do you remember when we did the a few episodes on biblical interpretation? And it was the Pardes where you have Peshat and Remes, you know, all of those?
I remember that, yeah.
Remember there was that parallelism that was almost like one was a prophetic story of another prophetic story of another. You know, remember those?
Yes.
It's kind of like that.
Right.
Dr. Itan Bar says that this helps the reader to understand, quote, to identify key figures based on past characters with whom he's familiar already. It's like one story confirms another story, it confirms another story, and it interconnects the whole thing. Because in this way, the Jews who have a decent understanding of the Bible actually expect to see the image of the Mashiach in other biblical characters.
Yeah.
That is their expectation.
That's right.
They expect to read the Bible and see the Messiah there.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of, I know you've often quoted the verse in John 5, that's a, sort of a favourite for you, John 5:39.
Oh, my favourite, yeah.
It says, you search the Scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. It's these that testify about me. And that's Jesus obviously speaking to the Pharisees.
And here's the funny thing. The Pharisees, this Jewish mind, they knew that if they looked in all of those different characters, they would see the image of Messiah. And then he was standing right in
Yeah, that's
front
right.
of them. And it was like, nothing to see here, la,
Yeah.
la, la. Amazing. Just like, gobsmackingly dumb. Anyway, so there are, of course, really distinct differences between Joseph and David. We know that. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, and he fled the temptation, whereas David observed Bathsheba having a bath on a rooftop and didn't even try to avoid the temptation. I mean, he had her brought to the palace, he committed adultery with her, and then had her husband murdered. Wasn't very righteous of him for a righteous man, was it? With a man who had a heart after God. He completely fell off the wagon there, didn't he? Anyway, so there are some very distinct differences between these men, and there are some stark similarities and parallels that to the Mashiach that you just can't ignore them. They're kind of amazing. Both Joseph and David experienced suffering and rejection by those that were most important to them, and these experiences were really essential preparation for their elevation to power and authority at a later date.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and Joseph and David, they were both in their teens. There are so many parallels.
Well, another one, of course, is that they were both, well, one was the youngest, one was the second youngest, but typically you would have, if someone was going to be designated as having a particular purpose in life, they would be the eldest. Like the eldest
That's right.
son would always inherit the father's goods and all this sort of stuff. But these two were both distinct from that, in that David was the youngest, Joseph the second youngest, and yet God was able to take them and elevate them and give them a great role despite the fact that they weren't the eldest.
Which didn't make sense in that culture.
Yeah, and
It
also
happened
brought a lot
anyway.
of jealousy on their brothers as well.
Well, kind of added to it,
Yeah.
didn't it? Added to the animosity. And there was actually considerable animosity when David had to go and meet his brothers and take provisions for them. And they virtually told him to rack off home, you little punk.
That's right,
Who
yeah.
do you think you are?
Questioning his motives and all that sort of thing.
Everything, yeah. And he was actually being a very obedient
Yeah,
son.
that's right.
Just doing what Dad said.
Yeah.
I wonder what the jealousy was. I've often thought that, what was the jealous aspect? I mean, these guys were fighting, they were known, What did they have against David? He was just a kid, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just always baffled me. And I guess I kind of understand why Joseph's brothers were jealous of him. I kind of lay the blame at Jacob's feet.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he gave him such special treatment, didn't he? So that was
he really
understandable in some respects.
I need to go back and have a look at some of those scriptures, because that was the jealousy before or after the elder brothers had commit heinous acts. I wonder if Joseph was born before or after when they destroyed whole towns in defending their sister Dinah's reputation and all the rest of it, killed all those people. Was it then Jacob decided, well, I'm going to shower all my affection on Joseph after what you guys did?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll have to go back and read that. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Joseph was chosen to lead the nation through a really difficult time after a lot of trauma on his part. But when he was chosen, it was for the survival not only of Egypt, but for the surrounding nations as well.
Yeah,
and
right.
by God's providence, the nation of Israel, that was just a family at that point, and brought them in and saved them. So he was chosen lowly, went through trauma, but ended up second in command of all of Egypt and was the salvation of his family.
So just a couple of parallels there that we've touched on in this program, but next time we're going to continue looking at more of the parallels between the life of Joseph and David and how they mirror Mashiach.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.